Welcome back to Race Report, everyone, and welcome to the very first Race Report podcast. And we're kicking off in a big way, but first, let me just do a quick introduction for you. We are now live on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify Podcasts as well. So if you prefer to listen rather than watch, you can do on those platforms. And that goes for all of my videos now as well, not just these podcast episodes. All my videos going forward will now be on those platforms as well. So if you fancy listening along whilst you're driving, whilst you're at work, you can now do that as well. So feel free to subscribe on those platforms. I will, of course, put those in the description below. I am also looking for questions and comments to include as part of the podcast. Obviously, it's a bit of a longer format, so I am looking to incorporate some of your feedback as well. So if you have any questions for me, questions about my content, questions about F1, anything at all, do throw them in the comment sections. I will pick them up and I will use them as part of the show. If you think there's any guests you'd like to see on, do let me know about those as well. Can't obviously guarantee it, but I will try my best. Now, without further ado, let's get stuck straight into the show, shall we? Well, welcome everyone to the Race Report podcast. Welcome back. And I have a special guest with me today. I'd like to welcome to the show Jack Aitken. Welcome, Jack, to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, it's brilliant to have you, Jack. I'm so glad you've joined us today. And what we're going to be talking about today is I've got a few questions for Jack to answer. Obviously, you're quite popular and got a lot of knowledge that I'm sure a lot of fans will want to know. So I've got a few questions for you. And we're also going to be covering a few news stories that have popped up over the course of the off-season as well. Get stuck straight in, shall we? So, Jack, how did you get into racing? How did that happen for you?
Well, that was quite a while ago now. When I was 7, more or less, I started doing some karting. Just through chance, really. Well, I say by chance. My family was always into F1 and into cars, so probably not that big a coincidence. But we went karting one day, really enjoyed it, and just kept asking to go back, basically, until my parents relented and they would take me back. And then that turned into getting my own car, and then my brother started doing it as well. So it turned into a bit of a family thing that we would do on weekends, which was nice. But it was more of a hobby than actually taking it too seriously at the beginning. It wasn't until I was a teenager that probably we started to commit to it a little bit more. That meant trying to take a bit more time out of school to do practice and competitions in Europe and racing with bigger teams. And it all just kind of progressed from there, really.
Oh, that's awesome. So you were actually allowed to take time off of school to go and do races, were you?
Sometimes. it was not easy because my parents didn't want to take me out of school, which were, that's completely fair enough. But my school was more academic than sporting. So they weren't always too happy about me taking that much time off. So it was a bit of a struggle sometimes. But yeah, occasionally I was able to do that.
Oh, that's really cool. I'm sure every kid would wish they could do the same at that age, I bet.
Well, it's not that glamorous when you have to take your history textbooks with you because you got an exam on Monday. So, sounds better than it.
Yeah, I'm sure homework on the road must have been a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, it wasn't the best, but we may do.
Well, one of the things I've always been interested in is how quickly drivers progress up the field, like especially at the early ages there. Like, how did you find that, and how did you find like switching teams and going into different formula so rapidly?
I found it quite okay for the most part. Some scenarios were a bit different, but generally stepping into a different car, I never had huge trouble with because I felt quite comfortable quite quickly in whatever I drove. Probably the harder part to get used to was as you move up the ranks, the dynamic of the sport changes a little bit, and it becomes a bit more. You have less track time for each sort of race event that you get, and you have to make more out of the time that you do get. So there's a bit of a mindset shift that you have to have. It becomes a bit more business orientated because things get more expensive. So you have to be more, savvy about where the budget comes from, and sponsors, partners, doing deals with teams, and that side becomes a lot bigger than when you're in your early years, and you really don't have to think about that at all. You can just kind of turn up to the track. So that's probably the biggest part of it. But it was, on the driving side, at least, it was never that big a deal. I was quite happy jumping into different stuff.
Oh, that's quite interesting to hear. I imagine it ages you quite quickly when, like, if you're a young man just trying to get on with your driving, and then you have to deal with all these business influences that are coming to you. I imagine that could be quite tough.
Yeah, well, it's good because it forces you to learn about this stuff at a relatively early age. So I feel like I've had quite a good education out of that. So I do know what I'm looking for a bit more when I approach potential sponsors and partners. I know a bit more how to speak to them, what they would expect out of a relationship. So it's all part of the learning process, and I've definitely got quite a lot out of motorsport in that sense.
Oh, fantastic! That's brilliant. So the majority of F1 fans will know you from your time as Williams reserve driver and at Renault before that. So you can tell us what's involved in that job a little bit.
Yep. So reserve driver typically is a younger driver than the racers, although that's not always the case. But they're a guy who's trying to break into the race seats. And for me, at least, I first became a reserve driver when I was in GP3, which is now known as Formula 3. So fairly early. And it just means that you have to be ready to jump in the car to replace them, the main race drivers, should they be injured or ill, anything that prevents them from racing, really. So you have to be physically ready, which means spending a lot of time in the gym. You have to be up to speed with the car and know all of the procedures and what all the buttons do, and all of that homework needs to be done in the background. And it's just being in a constant state of readiness for a very small chance that something might happen, which can be a bit of a weird place to be. But if you do that role well, and you do some of the testing that usually goes with that and perform well, that can end up in a race seat. So a lot of young drivers aim for that.
Oh, fantastic. No, it's brilliant to learn about that stuff because it's not something us fans really get to see all that much. Of course, we were lucky enough to see you in the car one time when George Russell was promoted into the Mercedes seat, and you got your shot at Sakir, I believe it was, right?
Yeah, that's it. It all came together quite last minute. It was, I think, Wednesday morning that I knew. And that had been 24 hours of waiting on phone calls and sitting patiently in the hotel, but finally did happen. And then from that point on, it's quite flat out, really. You get to, you have to go to the track and just make sure that you try and learn everything as quickly as possible, because I was ready, but there are things that are specific to the race weekend that you have to get up to speed with. You have to make sure that you fit in the car. All of these little things that you don't really think about, and dealing with all of the press and the media, which becomes a really big part of your life when you're in F1. And the weekend flew by for me, really. So, which was good and a bad thing, because I was able to just crack on with the work and try and make as good an account of myself as possible. But then on Monday, I had to sit back and sort of digest everything of what had just happened, because it's obviously a bit of a lifetime experience, once in a lifetime experience for a lot of people. So, yeah.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. So was Monday all just about savouring what you'd just been through, that kind of thing?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, there was a bit of there's always a bit of frustration afterwards because you feel like you could have always done a better job. But for the most part, I was quite happy with the job that I did actually, and just keen to try and have another go. As you know, I think that's natural as well. So yeah, it was generally positive thoughts afterwards, which was nice.
Absolutely, that's brilliant. Well, we did see you in. Well, the last time we saw you was in Abu Dhabi first practice, so literally the last F1 race that happened, and it looked like you did quite well there as well. You beat both of the Hasses and your teammate Nicholas Latifi as well. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised at how well it went because it'd been pretty much a full year since I'd been in the Williams because I hadn't been needed last year really, which is a good thing for the team, but obviously a bit sad for me. So I was a bit concerned about how quickly I'd be able to get back up to speed because compared to a normal test day, the FP1 session is very short. Really, you've got you get 3 runs. The first 2 runs are maybe 5 laps each. And then the last run, is a bit of a longer run, maybe 7 or 8 laps. And that's it. So you really have to dive in at the deep end. And if you don't want to take too many risks, then you end up being quite cautious. And you have to remember that you're not racing the car that weekend. It's in this case, it's George's car. So if you crash it and they run out of bits, that's a pretty bad situation to be in. So you do have to take a degree of caution. Having said all of that, it went really well. And I was pretty comfortable in the car, and I think everyone was pretty happy with the performance, which is always good. And then after that, I was a spectator for the rest of the weekend, which turned out to not be such a bad thing because there was plenty to watch.
Yeah, I bet that was one of the best races to be a spectator for, eh?
Yeah, it was just incredible. Even because I feel like a lot of the F1 paddock, you become a bit not numb to it, but it's normal that if you see something 100 times, you're a little bit less reactive to it because you've probably seen it before. I don't think anyone's seen a finale like that one before, and the whole paddock was just electric afterwards. It was pretty amazing.
Oh wow, yeah, like to be a fly on the wall there would have been amazing. So that's great. So I suppose the next question for you is what you're up to next year, or this coming year, I should say. Any plans at all racing wise?
Highly top secret. Couldn't possibly. No, I can tell you a little bit. You should be able to hear more about my plans in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. Contracts are kind of being drawn up and finalized, which is good because the season will start in a month and a half or so. I'm going to stay in Europe doing similar stuff to what I did last year in the endurance space. I really enjoyed it last year and I got a lot out of it. And I kind of want to keep going along that journey because I'm learning a lot. I always raced in single seaters in junior formulas, which is, the level of competition is amazing. But it's quite a singular format of racing, and I repeated it for many years. So last year, to step out of that and do something different was just really refreshing. And I met a lot of new people because it's a different paddock and different teams, different drivers. And that was really cool getting to know everybody. And it's quite a nice environment. And I feel like I've got unfinished business because we missed probably the biggest race of the year last year when I had that crash at Spa. So I want to have another crack at that, and maybe some of the other big endurance races are coming along. So hopefully you'll get the final news soon, but something along those lines.
Oh, fantastic! Definitely looking forward to that then. It's interesting what you said about the GT racing because, I actually have in my notes that you took your first steps into GT racing last year. It's interesting you say like it's a new thing. So do you like seek out these new racing experience and stuff like that? Because it's not something we see a lot of F1 drivers or aspiring F1 drivers make that switch very often.
Yeah, I think on a human level, there was a desire to do something different. Um, the drive to get to F1 can be quite all consuming. And that's quite fun at times in itself, because to really throw yourself at one goal for a long time is it takes a lot of commitment, and leads you down paths where you're turning over every little stone to try and find an advantage, which can be great. But like I said, I've been doing the same thing for a long time, whether that was F3 and then F2. And I just didn't feel like I had more to gain from it, particularly because I didn't have the budget anymore to be with the top teams in Formula 2. So your chance of winning is very low. So why not take, the resources that we did have and have a proper go at doing something different, where I was going to learn a new format of racing, force myself to share with teammates and compromise, and maybe have to drive a car that isn't perfectly suited to me all the time. And yeah, so it was great to do something different. And I still kept my foot in F1 by being the reserve with Williams, which hopefully that will continue in some form as well. So I have my foot in one foot in each, as it were, and they've been really supportive of that as well.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, that sounds very exciting. Like, yeah, you've got hopefully best of both worlds.
Yeah, hopefully. It is quite interesting seeing more young drivers trying different stuff, whether that's, quite a few guys going over to IndyCar this year, like Callum Ilott, who I raced with in F2 and subsequently last year against in GT as well. So he's doing a similar thing. Christian Lundgaard's going over there. In GT, we're getting more people trying it. LMP2 in the prototypes. There's a lot of ex F3 and F2 guys who are making a mark. So it's a bit of a trend, which is cool to see.
Oh, brilliant! Great. Oh, you kind of touched on it a little bit in that period there, but you did have quite a serious incident at Spa, where you came away with quite serious injuries. I think you fractured your vertebrae and your collarbone, right?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, it was the biggest race of the year for us, the 24 hours of Spa. So longest and most prestigious. We qualified pretty well. My teammates and we were all rookies to GT racing last year. So I don't think a lot was expected of us, but we qualified. We were P2, but then the lap got taken away for a dubious track limits infringement. I didn't say that. It was, of course, completely the correct decision. But then we were still in just outside the top 10, which is pretty good. And unfortunately, about halfway through my first stint, when we were looking pretty fast, I lost the car going through Eau Rouge, which is the fastest corner at that track. And there's not a lot of runoff, so I hit the barrier. And then the barrier smacked me back out onto the track, and I got hit by a couple of cars that were coming through. So it's probably the biggest accident of my career. And the injuries that you mentioned, I've only really, in the last month or two, completely come out. I can't even really say that I'm completely recovered. There are nagging things that are still going on. But I'm out, going to the gym again. I'm riding my bike, going running, and I can do all of that stuff relatively okay. So, but yeah, it was a couple of months basically of bed rest, because the collarbone, I had surgery to fixate that with a plate, because it was quite a bad break. But the back, there's nothing to be done for it. It was stable, but I just have to wait for the bone to heal itself. And then in the third month, I was able to start mobilizing myself again and try to build up some of the muscle around my those vertebrae again, some strength in my arm. And I did get back in the car. I think it was at the end of 3 months. It was 10 weeks or something like that for the last round of GT. And then obviously got back in the F1 in Abu Dhabi a month after that. So it was a bit unfortunate to say the least, but luckily it wasn't worse, which it easily could have been. And as with any big injury, you learn quite a lot about your body and taking some strength from that. So that's all good.
Oh no! Well, firstly, like, thankful you're all right and that you're mended or on the road to recovery. So that's brilliant. But yeah, like we've had a few scary incidents at Eau Rouge in a couple of Formula now, haven't we? Like I think they are modifying the track slightly, right, to kind of try and sort that issue out.
Yeah, I've seen some images that show it, that they've basically tightened the radius of the corner, which will force the cars to be slower. I think that, if we wanted to keep the corner the same, they would have to move the barriers back on the left-hand side as you go up, which is with the barriers that I hit. The right-hand side is fine. They're quite far back from the track, and there's a lot of tarmac runoff to slow down before you hit them. But on the left, there's barely any room. I mean, I think I lost the car right in the middle of the corner, which is 250 kilometers an hour. And I only managed to scrub off 20 kilometers an hour before I hit the barrier, because there's not enough space. And really, they would have to change that, but they can't, because there's a big old house that sits on top of Eau Rouge behind the barrier. I don't know whose house it is, or if it's just a circuit, like admin building or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's why they've chosen to change the profile of the corner instead.
Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, hopefully that kind of mitigates the issue at least slightly, so we don't have these super big incidents anymore. Coming out of that, how did like the rehab process, like, did you bring anything out of that at all? Like, did you kind of start thinking differently out of that, or is it a case of like just need to get back on the horse and get going again?
I mean, I actually I fractured a vertebra before, about 6 years ago. So I kind of had some experience with it. This was worse though, because it was a more severe fracture, so it was going to take a lot longer to heal. And I'd never broken my collarbone before. I mean, so it was a bit ironic, it felt like, because Barry, who's the one who put me in touch with you to get to do this podcast, who rides bikes as I do. I like to ride my bike. People might know that. I always thought I was going to get in trouble one day for falling off my bike and breaking my collarbone, which is a classic cyclist injury.
Oh, right.
And having to go, hat in hand to my team and say, I've really fucked up here, and I'm not going to be able to drive because I've injured myself. So of course I break my collarbone in the car instead, which I really wasn't expecting. But there you go. But yeah, the rehab was, like I said, not actually that intense. It was just a lot of rest. The worst part is that you have to be very patient with it, which I already knew from having injuries in the past. And you can do a lot more damage by trying to do too much too soon than not doing enough. And I'm quite guilty of that. I was trying to do stuff and being told off because the fracture was still not really set enough. The new bone hadn't come in and hardened that site, so things could still move, and that could be pretty disastrous. So you have to be very patient, but then it's also amazing to see what the body can do by itself. I was dosing up on calcium and vitamin D, because those are things that all help bone growth, and just letting it do its thing. And you see yourself gradually getting a little bit more flexibility in the spine again, being able to rotate just a little bit more before you get pain. Likewise for the collarbone, once I had the plate put in, which is quite a big plate. I mean, it was about that big. I mean, if we don't have video, it's about 4 or 5 centimeters across.
Right.
And I went from not being able to lift my own arm to lifting weights within a month. So yeah, I've rambled a bit here, but the things that I've really taken away from it were things that I already knew, which is the body will do amazing things if you leave it alone and don't get in the way and start messing things up. So patience, rest, and then when you do start coming back to training, you're doing it in the right way, in the right amount, and being very deliberate and careful about it. So yeah, and I didn't really have any issue getting back in the car. After that, I've had bad accidents before. This is the worst that I've had, and definitely, I think you're probably a bit psychopathic if stuff like that doesn't affect you mentally. So it did affect me, and it was quite scary to see how close I could have been to some very, very serious injuries or worse. But having said that, I know what happened. I was conscious throughout. I know why it happened, and I've understood all of that, digested it, and you kind of accept the risk, and then you move on. I already knew that there were risks with driving cars. Personally, I don't think that there's any more risk than going out and riding my bike on the road, or going to do whatever extreme sport that I would like to do in the holidays. So it's calculated, and that makes it okay in my head to go back and do the same thing again.
Actually, an answer, like a very similar answer to we hear a lot of drivers, and I don't think us as fans can really like understand that mindset, because we see the big crashes and we're like, oh, that's really scary and stuff like that. But yeah, that the calculating nature of a racing driver is always interesting to me, because you guys tend to always say like, yeah, like risk reward, it's worth it kind of thing.
I kind of disagree. Well, I have a different perspective. Let's say, what sport do you play, or do you have any hobbies that have physical activity?
My biggest one's definitely been football, but I've also been a weightlifter in the past as well. So
Okay.
I had a few bumps there, definitely.
Yeah. So I always look at it from the point of view that it's just what's normalized for you. So I can't play football to save my life. I've tried and crap, scarred from school. But anyway, if someone comes in, studs up and slams into your ankle and you get a pretty bad break, I can well imagine me looking from the sidelines at someone that doesn't play, doesn't understand why people go out on every Sunday and play in the morning. I'd look at that and think, why the hell are you doing that? The risk versus reward is just insane. Because you're completely unprotected. It could affect your livelihood, etc., etc., etc. So I'm asking all the same questions that people ask me, and the answer is just, well, that's what I like to do, and I do it every Sunday, and most of the time it's fine. And I know the risks, and I know what's going to happen, and yeah, there's a chance that something bad will happen. So it's really no different than that. It looks very spectacular when I have a crash in my. Actually, it's quite satisfying that I had a very spectacular crash, because it would be a bit rubbish if you looked on YouTube afterwards and it's pathetic. But yeah, it looks spectacular. But the fact is, the cars are so safe now, and there's so many systems in place to keep the drivers safe, that it looks a lot worse than it is.
That's a fantastic answer. And I hadn't thought about that. Like, what do you think of other sports and their kind of their aspects of injury? So that's really interesting. That's great to hear.
My brother plays rugby, and I think he's absolutely insane. He played rugby when he was at uni for his school, for his uni, and he's not the bigger. He's a big guy, but he's not the biggest guy on the team. And I watch him get slammed into again and again, and throwing himself at the other guys who are like twice his size, and I'm like, this is just ridiculous. You're asking for like a concussion or something. I need to get some. It's the same thing. I was like, well, I don't understand, but clearly you're okay with it, so that's fine.
Excellent. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, well, that was quite an intense topic. So let's move on to something a little bit lighter. What do you get up to in your off season? What do you enjoy doing when you can like sit down and relax?
I think the first thing I do is I become very lazy in the off season, as I think a lot of people working in F1 do, and rightly so, because it's a very intense schedule. There's a lot of travel, particularly the last couple of months of the season. You're going to some pretty far-flung places, whether that's the Americas, South America, North America. You're going to the Middle East. Early in the season, you might be in Asia. So. But you get thrown around all these time zones, and by the time you get home, you just want to chill out a little bit. At least I do. I know some others do like to keep going, and they go traveling and have their own free time and holidays and actually get to explore and look at the places that they're going to. But yeah, I like to chill out and just take it easy. Once I've had my fill of that, I do enjoy training to an extent. I like riding my bike, which I think people who follow me will know that. I like to run. I like to try new things, whether that's, I don't know, going on a hike or water sports, whatever. I like being active. And then just trying to catch up with friends as well. Because again, you're traveling so much during the year. The longest period that I'm at home is now. In January is really the time when I can actually see people and get out, catch up with old friends, or just be around and be social. So there's a lot of that as well.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, like it must be strange to travel so much around the world, and then you don't even know what, like, if people are up yet back home or anything like that, even if you just want to text or call them, right?
Yeah, I think you disconnect a little bit from home, especially when you're away for more than a couple of races, and you actually end up just focusing more on the people that you're traveling with. So you often travel with your team. Sometimes, there are multiple teams and people within those teams that you're all quite close to. And you just end up spending more time with them. And well, actually, you're social with those guys. You have a drink in the evening. You get dinners out in town when you have time. And at the track, of course, you're working, but you still get to see people. So it's just moving from one circle to another.
Okay, that's brilliant. Does that form quite a bond within the team then when you are away at these tracks, these distant tracks?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially when you're with a team for more than a single season. Again, in F1, there are mechanics, engineers, people who have been working there for some of them for decades in the same team. But it's quite often that they're there for multiple years, several years, and you do form bonds, and there's a bit of camaraderie within the teams, which is nice. So yeah, for sure.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, we've seen a little bit of a rise in online sim racing recently. We saw Max Verstappen take part in the Le Mans 24 Hours Virtual, and I think Lando Norris is involved in stuff like that as well. Has that taken your fancy at all?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of it. I did the Le Mans 24 Hour Virtual last year. I actually managed to get on the podium, but that was a little bit more due to my teammates than myself, I dare say, because they were quite accomplished sim racers, which I am not. I did think about doing it again this year, but my schedule just didn't really allow for enough practice, because I do have to practice quite a lot to get anywhere near the level that those guys are at who are doing it full time. But I do like doing it. Like I said before, as you move up to the higher ranks of racing, track time becomes quite valuable and quite scarce. So being able to do a bit of sim racing in the off season or between races can be quite valuable. It's not going to give you the exact same sensations and feelings that driving the real car would, but it's you being competitive, getting in the mental headspace of a race, and just going through those motions, which is, it's got its value in its place as well.
Brilliant. Well, that sounds like you're pretty positive about it, and you can see this continuing for other drivers then as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very positive about it. Williams have quite a big esports department, which I hope we all get on quite well, and I like to do the occasional race with them. The main barrier for me is the practice time, because, like I said, to be competitive, I do have to put in quite a lot of effort. A lot of the events are endurance events, like the Le Mans 24 Hours, which means that you have teammates. It's a little bit different if you're an individual competing and life gets in the way, you haven't been able to practice. Fine. When other people are relying on you, then there's a bit of an obligation to make sure you're doing what you should. And for them, it's their livelihoods actually to do the esports and the sim racing, and they're looking at that prize money as quite a big thing. Whereas for people like me, it's not. It's something that I do in my off season to keep sharp. So that's, you have to remind yourself that it's a lot more serious for these guys than it is for you. You can't just drop in, do it when you fancy.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you don't want to let your teammates down when there's more on riding on for them than there is for yourself, sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think last year when I did Le Mans virtual, I wish I'd, tallied up the hours of practice that I put in, but I'm sure it was still less than what those guys did. But it was a lot. I probably spent a month practicing for it during lockdown. We had the luxury of time, so that was fine. But when I first started, I was seconds off the pace. And even around a lap as big as Le Mans, it was like 3 or 4 seconds every lap. And I don't think I'm a bad driver. And I kind of whittled that down through days and weeks of training to still being half a second off the pace and probably still crashing once every stint that I did in practice. But luckily I didn't do that in the race. But it's bloody hard, and the level that they're at is astounding.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes when I watch them, I'm like, "Oh, could they do the real thing, maybe?" And then we've seen one of the esports drivers graduate into F2 now, haven't we?
Yeah, Boniface. It will be interesting to see how he goes. I don't think he's with the strongest team on the grid, but they're not bad either. So yeah, he could definitely get some results if he's capable.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing how he gets on for sure. Right, I think that wraps up my list of questions. So we could pop into the news stories right now. There's not a lot of them, to be honest. Obviously, it is the off season, so not too much going on. There is, however, some F1 car announcement dates being flown around at the moment. It looks like we're getting pretty close to actually seeing some 2022 cars. So does that excite you quite a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I always look forward to the launches. I think every fan does, because it's just exciting, especially when you get that the new cycle of rules coming in. There's always that little bit of wondering what are they going to look like, and hoping that they look good. I've seen some renders. I think they will look good, and I also like a lot that they are going to be smaller than the previous cars, because I think that they've been getting a bit bloated, both in weight and in size over the last decade. So this is the first time that they're actually going to reverse that a little bit, at least on the size department, not on the weight, sadly. But yeah, very excited to see what people are going to come up with.
Yeah, the renders do look beautiful, don't they? I'm kind of waiting to see if there's any like loopholes that have been kind of found in the regulations by any smart engineers out there. See if we can spot anything when they do get shown, for sure.
Yeah, sadly, I think people are so sensitive to that nowadays, or teams are. A lot of the time, the launch car that is presented is not the car that you will see rolling out in Barcelona for testing, because if they have found something, they don't really want people catching it early. So I know of teams who have even basically dressed up their previous year's car in the new livery, maybe changed a few winglets here and there to make it not look completely the same, and then release that. And the only time that you'll see the new car is when it rolls out for testing on day one. Teams won't quite be able to do that this year, because obviously the regulations are such a big change. But yeah, they are quite sneaky nowadays.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that at all, but it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because you don't want your competitors to see something and then figure that out themselves even before testing's happened.
Yeah, day one of testing is when the eagle-eyed viewers should be having a look at cars, really.
Brilliant. Well, definitely looking forward to that for sure. The only other thing I had on my news is actually the FIA inquiry into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. We've had some dates around when the teams will hear and when the public will hear about that. But beyond that, it seems like they're just going to take their time with it and kind of let people, inside the teams have their feedback. So there's not too much going on there. But have you got any kind of thoughts about that at all?
I think like a lot of people, um, I just hope that positive things come out of it. I think there's quite a split opinion on what happened in Abu Dhabi. And I myself struggle to form a really strong opinion because I can see it from both sides. Um, but clearly they feel the pressure. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put in the inquiry in the first place. And whether that means changing of procedure or personnel or just the communication between teams and the FIA. Something clearly has to change. There are a few things that have changed already. I think Mercedes are very, very keen to see some action taken. I just hope that there's some clear positives and actions that we can take out of that whole situation, and hopefully move forwards and people can be relatively happy. I know it's going to be a bitter pill for some people, no matter what they come up with. So that's a bit tough.
Yeah, it seems like one of those situations where they're not going to be able to satisfy all the parties, but hopefully we can come to some sort of arrangement where at least it won't happen again in the future, right?
Yeah, I think it is an issue that has needed addressing. And the issue that I mean is just having a little bit more clarity around the rules. I think it worked for a really long time with Charlie Whiting when he was heading up the race direction, because he had years and years of experience, and he was very comfortable in his position. The teams were very comfortable with him and had a lot of respect for him, which is quite a crucial thing as well. So the rules were never really interpreted any other way than Charlie's way, and he was quite good at that and handling the whole situation. Now that we've had a couple of years since unfortunately he passed away, and there are people coming up through the ranks to rightly fill positions, there's a bit more flux going on, and indeed some of the drivers are pushing the limits of what you might consider okay or not okay. So it's a very difficult time for everyone, and I don't think it's particularly anybody's fault. But things do have to change going forwards.
That's a really good way of seeing it. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, that's all of our current news, really. Like I said, off season is kind of sitting here waiting for the cars to get shown now, so there's not too much going on. So I think we'll wrap up there. Have you got anything you'd like to plug at all?
No, don't think so. I mean, it's off season for me too, so I'm pretty relaxed. For those of you who don't know, I'm on social media at Jack Aitken Racer, pretty much on all my platforms, and we like to not keep it too serious around our channels. So check it out if you want to.
I'll be sure to include all of those in the description as well below for anybody who wants to check those out. And thank you everyone for joining us for the podcast, and thank you to Jack as well for joining us. It's been a brilliant time to chat with you, so thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me, Fizz.
How about that? What a way to kick off our very first podcast. A big thanks to Jack for coming on. If you want to see more, please do subscribe on YouTube or follow us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts as well. Hope you enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to doing more of these over the 2022 season with you.